I'm gonna start the live stream before I let them in.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How you doing?
I've already started the recording and live streaming, so I just wanted to let you all know that that's happening. I just let David in. There you go.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How you doing? Oh, it's delayed. I'm hearing delayed audio.
I've already started the recording and live streaming, so I just wanted to let you all know that that's.
I wonder if that has something to do with you starting recording before, Katie.
I don't know. I have to just turn David in.
Is it playing back live or streaming?
There we go.
There we are. Thanks. Hey, David. Hey,
Yep.
John.
Hey.
And no, I don't think that should affect John's audio. I'm not sure why he's not connecting. Why it's not connecting.
Second here. There he is. Hey, John.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing?
All right.
Good.
Do we have a full house? We've been missing.
One shot.
Mary.
Oh, sorry. We got a full house.
We have a full house. Get started. I'm going to do Norwalk first. It's called to order, roll call, full house. Is there any public participation? No, none.
No one is in the, nope, no one's here.
All right, so then we'll go to administration. Approval of the minutes of the July 13th, 2023 regular meeting. Do I have a motion? So moved by Kelly. Seconded. Good. Anyone have any changes? Suggestions, deletions? None? All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. The financials, you approve the Norwalk Housing Corporation Statement of Revenues and Expenditures and balance sheets for all the funds for fiscal year ending June 30th. There she is.
Hi,
Eugenia,
John.
it's up to you. You're on.
Okay. For the fiscal year ending June 30th, the Norwalk Operating Fund 400 had revenues of $69,000 and expenditures of $62,000, which resulted in an operating surplus of $7,000. And then on its balance sheet, we have assets of $738,000 and liabilities and net assets of $738,000. And for the fund 450 Norwalk Fund, it had revenues of $2,900 and expenses of $3,100, resulting in an operating deficit of $200. And this fund's balance sheet has $124,000 of assets and $124,000 of liabilities and net assets. And that's all.
That's it. Any questions? None? Lisa made the motion to approve these financials. All in favor? Aye. Okay, any other business, new business, old business? None? Well, so we're making a motion to
Mary, I
adjourn.
just want to make sure you know your video is not on, so we can't see you if you're raising your hand.
She put a note in.
She put a note in the chat that she had to step away from video for a moment.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you, Kelly.
Minutes are approved. To our motion to adjourn.
So,
So moved. All in favor? Aye. Great. Moving on to Norwalk redevelopment. Calling to order. Roll call is attended by the commission. Anyone, any public participation? None? Move on to 4, administration. Approve the minutes of the July 11th, 2023 regular meeting. Someone make a motion?
John, before you do, just in that part, they just said, I think, Miss Copper seconded, and it should have been Cooper.
Was that corrected? We have that corrected. Any other changes?
Thank you, Lisa, for pointing that out.
All right. I have a motion to approve those.
So,
So moved. All in favor? Aye. David didn't approve anything. All right. Going on to the financials. Approve the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency Statement of Revenues and Expenditures and balance sheets for all funds for fiscal year ending June 30th. Virginia.
Okay, for the fiscal year ending June 30th, the operating fund 100 had actual revenues of 1,500,000 versus budgeted revenues of 1,428,000, which resulted in a favorable variance of $72,000. The actual expenditures were 1,949,000 versus a budget of 1,757,000, which resulted in an unfavorable variance of $192,000. This was mostly due to higher personnel expenses and higher administrative expenses. Legal fees also include $111,000 that was paid to Shipment for 1517 Chestnut Street, of which $100,000 was recently just reimbursed to the agency. And the net operating deficit of $448,000 versus a budgeted $329,000 operating deficit resulted in an unfavorable operating deficit of $119,000.
Any questions?
Going to its balance sheet. For Fund 100, at June 30th, it had $3,909,000 in cash, receivables due to other funds, property and equipment, and right of use asset. And it had $1,650,000 in net loans receivable and $2,584,000 in total liabilities and $2,975,000 in net assets. Then the Brookfield Properties Operating Fund 115 had revenues of $32,000 and expenditures of $32,000, and this resulted in a break-even bottom line. The balance sheet for this fund had $433,000 in cash and due to other funds, and $433,000 in liabilities and net assets. And then for Fund 200, the CDBG revolving loan fund, it had revenues of $17,000, which consists of interest income from notes receivable, and expenditures of also $17,000, and resulted in a break-even bottom line. The balance sheet for this fund had $454,000 in cash and due from other funds, and $195,000 in net loans receivable, and total liabilities and net assets equaled $649,000. And then for the CDBG non-revolving loan fund, there were revenues of $1,025,000 and program expenditures of the same amount, $1,025,000, which resulted in a break even. And then the balance sheet for this fund shows $328,000 in cash, receivables, and other funds, and $246,000 in net loans receivable. There's $574,000 in liabilities and net assets. And then the agency's Fund 500 had revenues of $1,198,000 and $1,198,000 in program expenditures, which resulted in a break even. And this fund's balance sheet had $1,600,000 in cash, accounts receivable and due from other funds, and $1,600,000 in liabilities and net assets. And that's the end.
Just out of curiosity, settlement, we received our settlement check. What fund did that go into? Or where is it?
Fund 100, and I put it into deferred because we received it just last week and it's a new year. But the agency can use it, whenever Brian wants to, use it. You guys tell me and we'll use it. But we do have something now in deferred revenue. Before at the end of June, we didn't.
That's
And
why I
Eugenia,
asked the
where did
question. I'm concerned about that.
Oh, sorry, Chairman. Where did the 100,000 get reclassed, the reimbursement for from the Spinnaker that you mentioned?
Yes, deferred revenue.
Deferred revenue as well? Okay.
That's where we're going to record. I mean, it happened in September.
Right.
So that's where we're going to record it.
Very good.
For Fund 100, of course.
And for all of you that, just to catch you all up, that was remember we were incurring legal fees last year and we were saying that there was going to be a reimbursement. Now that has been approved, we were able to get 100,000 and then the remaining 50,000 that we're entitled to will occur at closing on the actual property.
Good. Any other questions? Do I have a motion to approve the revenues and expenditures and balance sheets for the redevelopment agency? To June. Moved by Lisa. Seconded. All in favor? Aye. I have an 80-pound dog that wants to say yes, and he's putting his, my arm's going like this because he's throwing his head against it. I'm sorry. Going to item B2.
Oh. I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Going to B2, approve the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency Statement of Revenues and Expenditures for July 31st. Eugenia.
Okay. For the month of July, the operating Fund 100 had actual revenue of 140,000 versus a budget of 126,000. And this resulted in a favorable variance of $14,000. The actual expenditures of 140,000 versus a budget of 152,000 resulted in a favorable variance of $12,000. And this is mostly due to a favorable variance in personnel expenses. The actual operating deficit of $362 versus a budgeted operating deficit of $26,000 resulted in a favorable variance of approximately $26,000. And that's all.
Any questions? Comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the revenues expenditures for the year ending July 31st? All right, Lisa makes the motion. Dave seconded it. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Going on to item 5, business. Citywide historic research assessment. Authorize the executive director to execute any and all for the Chronicle Heritage Service Agreement. Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So what you have before you tonight is a contract for a Norwalk citywide historic property survey. We've been working with the city. They had an interest, obviously in our, affordable, we have our, historic property rehabilitation fund. One of the things that we've been looking for is some sort of, qualified metrics in order to evaluate these projects in terms of what's historic, what's not. So the city has requested us to, undertake this study. The proposal is for about 89,000, I believe here, which we don't expect to really go over that. And basically what they're going to be doing is going through, I think we have a total of 300 properties scoped in this current scope to determine their cultural significance, do some windshield surveys, do some research. We developed this scope, not just sort of internal, but we also worked with Todd Bryant. He had a chance to take a look at this. I think part of this, in terms of the city's interest in having us use some of our historic facade monies for this, is in regards to some of the ordinances that they were working on for demolition delays and things of the like. So they want to make sure that whatever ordinances that they're applying to sort of these historic preservation resources are vetted, and we have some sort of quantitative indicator. So Chronicle Heritage was interviewed by us and the city. They were selected, and we're seeking tonight as approval of their actual contract and scope.
Any questions? David looks like he.
So I'm not even sure where to start. So the funds that we've approved for historic rehabilitation have generally been limited to properties within the redevelopment plan areas, the areas that we consider blighted. So are we considering going out of this if they're, since this is supposed to be citywide, the way I read it, will anybody be able to apply for these funds, or?
Yeah, that wasn't the
how this is
intent.
gonna be used.
Yeah, that wasn't the intent actually for the rehab funds, but the analysis we wanted to do citywide since we were going to be doing it, but we haven't had any discussions in terms of expanding our geography for the actual funding of rehab projects.
So my other big concern about this, and I haven't been involved in this, so, Todd has, so that makes me feel better. I'm concerned that we're going to do this study and then the city's going to say, okay, well, we have our list and nothing else can go on. And it's like, well, this is only 300 properties out of 17,000. There's more than 300 historic buildings that occur. So I'm concerned that, what happens after this?
Right. Well, one of the things we could do, David, too, if we just get the authorization tonight, we could have an offline call if you want. We could go through some of these things. We haven't discussed them with this detail, and then maybe adjust the scope accordingly, just to make sure that some of these concerns are addressed.
Yeah, because I'm just not even sure how they're going to drive around town, do a windshield survey of 17,000 buildings, and I actually think there are 35,000 buildings in Norwalk when I looked at this last. And come up with 300.
I believe the 300 was to dive deeper into them, and they were going to do it overall, sort of inventory building from the existing inventory that's occurred. But we could definitely have another pass of the scope based on your comments if you want to take some detailed time with it, and then we could address it before we sign the contract.
Well, I just don't know that this is going to work is my concern. It's because somehow you have to get through all of the buildings and we have to have a local resource inventory that has everything on it.
Right.
But it's always been cost prohibitive to do it because the state gives grants 15,000 or 20,000 at a time to do this, but they only look at 250 buildings. So it was like overwhelming. I figured out it would take like 38 years. To go through all of that. And I'm really concerned that after this is done, the city's going to say, oh, check. And then we have some demos come up and, oh, they're not on the resource inventory. We just updated. So yeah, go ahead and knock it down. And it's like, the 300 doesn't cover it. But I don't have a better idea for approaching it because it is overwhelming. So, and my other question is, where's the funding coming from for this?
City capital budget for historic facade rehab.
Given David's comments, could I just ask for a clarifying, could you state the purpose again of doing this? I don't mean to be unclear, but I guess I'd like to understand the purpose, if you wouldn't mind restating it.
No, that's completely fine. So, this is, a lot of this came out of the discussions with the demolition delay. The city had an interest in us doing a citywide survey to basically develop a local inventory of historic properties. So they had something that, if you're on this list, you're subject to these ordinances, or potentially, and obviously there's guidelines that we have that we didn't talk about amending, you might be eligible for some of the funding. So that's the fundamental purpose, is to develop a local resource inventory. And it's at the request of the city.
And how did the number of 300, how was that arrived at?
I think that
And
was
I'm sorry if
scoped
I'm-
based on the budget in terms of what they put forth.
I'm sorry if I'm repeating, it's just David's questions are making me rethink this, so that's why I'm just asking for clarifying questions.
No, yeah, that's completely fine. And I don't think there's any immediate urgency in this. If we wanted to have a larger discussion about scope, we're pretty agnostic. We just want to make sure we get something that's valuable to everybody. It's up to you all.
So if I may just explain to the commission that the historical commission does have what's called a local resource inventory of historic properties. And I actually don't know how many are on it, but it was done manually largely by Ralph Bloom in the 80s. But it's actually he hit like the most important stuff. But as we go through time, there's a lot more stuff that's on it. And it doesn't really provide any protection, but at least it's a starting point for a homeowner to know that their property, is recognized as some historic value. So we also have 26 historic districts in Norwalk, believe it or not, there are 26. The last one to be recognized was the Whistleville district, but they're really all over town. Anyway, but you put all the historic districts together and the local resource inventory together, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the number of structures we have. And they come up for demolition, and the historical commission objects, people object because it's this beautiful colonial house, or the oldest house in Norwalk just gets torn down. And everybody's like, well, why isn't it on the list? Why isn't it protected? It's like, well, because it's an enormous amount of work. The thing is like I said, we can get $20,000 grants from the state to evaluate, I think it's 250 properties. And so this, other than them, there is value in doing the whole scan, although I don't know how they're going to do that, of all 17,000 properties. But we can get 250 done for $20,000. This is like 300 properties for $90,000. So, just from it seems like a lot of money for 300 properties. And again, my concern is that the city will then misuse, this saying, oh, we've done the study, check the box. We're not going to allow demolition delays on anything that's not on the local historic register. I can just see all this happen. So those are my concerns.
How do we
I
prevent
think the
that?
300 number, I think they're obviously going to do a larger scan, as you talked about, David, and the 300 is what they're going to dive deeper on to create more data in the repository for than they typically would with, as at least as I understood with those the $20,000 grants. We were obviously going back and forth with Todd Ryan as well on that, whether it made sense for us to go for those. But just, given the administrative requirements and chasing down SHPO and all of that for 20 grand, it almost exceeds it in terms of administrative time. That's why we're also reluctant to go for those. But your overall comments in terms of the scope and cost are heard, and I think it's worth some additional analysis.
Well, I completely understand that. And in the last inventory we did with the $20,000 grant was like in 2012, and I coordinated it. I got sucked into it, and yeah, it was a nightmare. But the SHPO didn't like the people who did it. Todd didn't like the people who did it. I like the people who did it. I thought they did a good job, but they recommended a couple of different historic districts be created, and that was never done. I think one was you can do non-contiguous historic districts. So you create a historic district for all the federal era houses in Norwalk, and then anybody can get on it who qualifies, and you just do the research on the house, and then it gets part of the district. And they recommended several things like that I thought were really good. And that might be, a good way to go as well. I didn't see, what I don't see from this proposal, I'm just talking out loud, is just, I don't see, does some strategy come out of it for addressing everything in the city beyond the deliverable of a deeper dive on 300 properties? Because that's, I think, what we're missing. And I didn't see that in the proposal.
Yeah, and I don't think that was fully contemplated as part of when we put out the RFP. We were basically just working with the city side of things in terms of what they were trying to scope and what they were looking for, and that wasn't included. So if it's a larger discussion, we should probably have that in between now and whenever, if this gets approved.
Well, I just don't think it's going to address what they're trying to get to.
Right.
So I don't mean to throw a bucket of water on this. I mean, this is
No,
great.
I mean, you wouldn't,
Kinda
this
moves
is your
stuff
area.
forward, just like,
Oh. I mean, would you be open to just tabling it, and then maybe we could have a call and sit down with the scope a little bit more and take a look at it? I wanted to ultimately create something of value too. So if you think there's room for more discussion, I think it makes sense.
that would be my preference.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion to table this till the next meeting?
Sure.
All in favor of tabling? Unanimous? All right,
David, if I could ask real quick, would you be open to maybe just having a call with Todd Bryant, maybe the consultant too, or just try to get caught up together?
Well, sure. And I would like somebody from the city side. I mean, who's
Yep.
been involved from the city side? Is this Jessica?
Jess and Tom Livingston.
Okay, yeah, I would like one or both of them on the call too.
Okay, yeah, no problem. We'll set that up.
I tried to stay out of the demo delay chart code revision.
So did I, and that's why you have a proposal in front of you tonight. So
They didn't do the one thing that would have made a difference, which was change the delay period to 120 days, 180 days. I told them, don't do anything else, just change that one number and you don't have to discuss anything. That's the thing that will make a difference in the demo delay.
Yeah.
And they just put nice, pretty language, and that's all great, but they didn't change the delay period. And that doesn't really help us. So
I think a call would be helpful.
some good points, David. Thank you.
sorry.
Moving on to item B1. Authorize the executive director of the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency, Brian, to execute any and all agreements in accordance with state Connecticut Department of Energy and Environment Protection requirements for the Harbor Loop Trail and approve the resolution language as attached. Anyone want to make a motion to open that?
So moved.
David made the motion. Brian,
Yeah, great. So I think a number of you are familiar with this project. If you recall, we did the design a while back for the section of Harbor Loop Trail, particularly along East Avenue. So we're looking at 148, 130 East Ave. These are actual state resources that we worked with Senator Duff to secure, to actually, advance that project to the tune of $6 million. We still need to go through a design phase, but what we have before you tonight is at the directive of DEEP. The funds will be administered through DEEP. And what we need to do is provide them an authorizing resolution in this regard. And we're still working with them to determine if it's going to be direct grant to us or a pass through, similar to what we did with the TOD. And that's going to be dependent upon the legislation that this was approved through. But we're still waiting to hear back from them. So I basically put in two options here that I know that they've been amenable to, so we can advance the discussion and then take it from there. So that's basically just to settle us as the implementing agency for these funds.
So this will pay for the actual construction of this section at 148 East Avenue and on the east side of the river. Is that?
Yeah, the boardwalk concept we had, and then that, yeah, and design as well. We're only at probably 15-20% concept design drawings. We still have to advance preliminary design, final design, permitting is going to be the big issue on this project.
Yep.
And what I'm trying to work to authorize concurrent to all of this, we still have some resources in our city capital fund, is a change order to do some wetland mapping that we need to do. And we need to do that while the vegetation is still there. So hopefully we can be able to authorize that in the next couple of weeks here. But we're trying to advance design concurrent, and yes, it's for construction, ultimately, the large chunk of these funds.
Cool.
And what will happen about some of the properties where there was an issue with easement?
Yeah, so a lot of the design worked around the easements. They went actually out into the water course, if you recall, particularly at 148 East Ave. But we still do need to work with the property owners, obviously, to talk about some of their concerns. One of the big ones was parking more so than the actual easement itself. And then 130, we're gonna have to reconcile that as well as part of the design phase. We really just took it through concept and had initial discussions with them, but the next stage is going to be really diving deep and figuring out what that looks like from an operations perspective for the property owners. But a lot of it in terms of is in public right away that we would be constructing, especially like I said, the boardwalk piece. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I'm happy to share the concept designs with you all if you'd like to see them, just kind of see where we're at. We can send those out after this meeting.
Yes, definitely.
They're obviously, I think they're going to change based on the feedback we get from, the state. And we had preliminary discussions with DOT and DEEP as part of the concept design, just to make sure we weren't heading in the completely wrong direction. But there's going to be an extensive permitting process as part of the designs, as I said.
I mean, I would think some of the places where you have to look for easements, I mean, I would think it's going to increase the value of their properties to have access to that kind of public space.
Yeah, and that's definitely the value proposition we sort of put forward. The concern was actually parking. That was the big concern, is having public parking occur in their spots, at the medical building. So I've been working to actually work with some parking providers to show them some options where they actually might even be able to monetize that, on the weekends when they may not have parking, and enforce it, with a little bit more ease than putting up gates or anything like that. There's some technology that exists that would allow them to do so.
Well, the whole point is to walk by their property, not to drive there and to go onto their part of it.
Right.
Brian,
It's an
is
important section, yeah.
is 130 East Avenue, is that the red brick apartment building?
Yes, yeah, I believe so. I'd have to confirm. That's the one I'm least familiar with, but it's definitely 148. We're always out there.
But there was a design done for that, a preliminary?
Yeah, I'll send you out what we had, what we designed. The 130 is going to be an interesting conversation. We already started it, and it was a little bit.
There's a lot of history on this. I looked at trying to finish this. I mean, just as a citizen, I called all of the property owners, their attorneys years ago when Mike and I tried to get the Harbor Loop Trail going. And I know a lot of the history on that. But
I've read a very extensive and actually very helpful email from Mike in this regard, in terms of his overall plan, the overall plan that you guys all had in the back time. So the former zoning director was like, and then Frank Zulo as the lawyer, they were screwing around with each other for that property. But I think that the river course has changed, and the high tide line has changed, and I don't think that property is his property anymore anyway. I think it's state. Interesting. Yeah, this is stuff we're going to have to reconcile through, actual preliminary design. We have an agreed upon concept.
Okay.
I took a cruise up the Norwalk River this past weekend. And it's amazing how high the tide was. You brought up the tide. It's amazing how high it's gotten, having been up there before. It's also, they have a lot of work to do there to get that trail in. So.
Yeah,
but people are using it, and they're going around the missing sections. I mean, and we kind of made our own section through Mill Hill and just made it up. And I see people every time I go over there, I see people walking through.
Yep, we did too. We saw a lot of people walking up there. So. Thank you. Any other questions or comments about this? Okay. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but we had a motion to authorize the executive director to execute all the agreements involved with the Harbor Loop Trail. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Moving on. Be it further resolved What's the next item here?
It's really just if we have to enable a pass-through agreement, depending on how deep one to administer it. So it's related to the same item. It just, that's the full resolution. If everyone wants to just, if that's amenable to the group.
Okay, why don't you go through the rest of it?
Yeah, so basically it's just if Deep ends up wanting to do a pass-through agreement, sometimes they, based on the legislation, they need to actually make the grant to the city of Norwalk that passes through to us to be the implementing agency. So that's all that language would do. But we still just haven't confirmed it. So I kind of put both options there because I want to get things moving with Deep. And I think this is going to help their responsiveness, which we've been having, a little bit of back and forth on.
Okay. Well, we approved item 1 and
It's
any
still the same
comments?
item.
Hmm?
I think it's still under the same item. If everyone's amenable to
Yeah, I
just,
was gonna say that. It's under the same item. If everyone's in agreement, we'll just include that with our original vote.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. And we're moving on to item 6, new business. Any new business?
Do we need to vote?
Thought we voted. We voted on item 1, and we're saying we'll include this in item 1.
Oh, I thought we just shook our heads. Is that a vote?
You want to vote? Okay. Let's have a vote to include items 1 and 2 with item I. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Any new business, old business?
no new business. I just want to let you all know, I don't know if you received the invite, but next Tuesday, we're doing our first public meeting for the Sono infrastructure study. It's going to be at the South Norwalk Library and Zoom. So it's up to you all what works for you. This is for the 1517 Chestnut project. I think some of you may have seen that P&Z has approved that, but we have the $5 million, well, $6 million grant in total. $1 million is going to the Columbus Court project, the affordable housing improvements, which we actually signed the agreement last week. So, or actually this week. So we're getting moving on that now. But that's for the design of it. So if you have any interest in attending, that's next Tuesday. And I believe it's 6 p.m. right, Katie? I don't know if you're on mute.
Yeah, she is.
Yep, 6 p.m.
6 p.m.
So I understand that they changed the train station, the plan of how traffic will move through the train station versus what we approved months ago.
In terms of the roundabout versus the cut through.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, that is again still at concept stages because we had basically when Jim Travers took a look at the roundabout concept, there was additional concern with the removal of more parking spaces. Also, the concept drawing, there was some just back and forth in terms of if that will actually accommodate the turning movement of the bus adequately. We're going to be discussing this as part of this, actual design engagement. So I think this is the time to start, diving into that even further.
So there's not a concrete design.
There's not a concrete design. That's what we're doing. So that we've engaged VHB to do the concrete design. We're just solving for, the world's problems over there. And I think the parking authority, given the fact that they just sold 60 of the parking spaces, is obviously concerned from a revenue perspective of losing what was up to almost 50 more to accommodate the roundabout, as opposed to doing a pass through. So it's still up for discussion. It's not like this has been approved or at that level of detail.
Well, somehow it'd be helpful if you could send out whatever's approved, because, I would just like to know, because, people always come back to us and go, why did you approve that? And it's like, that's not what it looked like when I voted on it.
Right. Yeah, when we had it, I mean, it's obviously a concept that we're taking a look at. When it goes to the entitlement phase, this TMP started to weigh in, and that's kind of where that changed. And now, so we don't have anything that's specifically approved, like as part of that package, because it's a public infrastructure. It's not attributable specifically to that development, because that road is currently public access. So we will be doing that, finding out what that actual design is through the meeting starting on Tuesday.
Well, and they also changed their building design too, in the alleyway and all that, and I haven't seen any. So, and I don't want to bog the process down with another approval. It's just kind of weird that we approve stuff and then it completely changes.
What do you refer, just so I can be clear, what are you referring to in terms of what we approved? Because this actually didn't come before us in that way.
Looked at it at some point. I remember we had all kinds of discussions about it, and they presented plans and we asked lots of questions.
Right.
Spinnaker, they presented, this like great alleyway thing, and access? I mean, am I confusing it with another meeting? I thought it was here.
No, they obviously did that. I think it's such a weird position when we do the LDA. It goes, and it's the same thing with city council and common council. I know they've had these discussions when they approve the LDA, it's at a concept level. And then it goes through the design review and entitlement process, and then things change. So I think it's, just being clear that what authority we have over that specific design is somewhat limited, to be honest, based on the current legislation, the way we work with the entitlement process of the city. But I just want to, and that's why our design review, I wasn't here when they created the design review process, but obviously Bob Griswold's went, and I said that, I don't know if you got that email that I had sent out saying, hey, this is going through, and we don't really get involved at that level. We shouldn't be involved at that level. And Bob Griswold is kind of negotiating out the design review of that, and that's how the design changed, is through that discussion. I'm not saying, so that's kind of working with what we have. So I just want to, make sure we're clear in terms of what our responsibility is in that regard.
Well, it's just that, if we're approving stuff and then something horrible gets built, citizens come back to us as their appointed representatives and go, why did you approve this? And I'll say, well, we just approved the LDA as a concept. It's like, I can't even explain that.
Right.
They're just gonna say you're a bunch of idiots. So, I'm looking, you're supposed to come back to us to explain the design review process and how that's gonna work at some point. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we need to dive into that. I think we should probably, have a discussion offline in terms of all the encumbrances on that. And then we can maybe report back at the next meeting, because I think there is opportunity to adjust, but it's also deeply encumbered by what the current legislation is on the city side from the zoning regs. So it's a delicate balance.
Well, they're changing the zoning regs, so if we need to change the zoning regs, now's the time to do it.
Right. Yeah, so I think I can follow up separately, and then we'll plan for something at the next meeting. I think it's time.
And as you were talking, I was thinking back, I saw the first concept plans about 12 years ago. And
Right.
it's been modified and changed again. I have no idea what they look like today, but it's been a long process. So
Yeah, so we'll plan, if that works for everyone, I'll plan to bring that up in detail at the next meeting. Because we structure the deal, we approve the deal, then it goes off into the black hole as kind of, I think it was, it's obviously an issue. It sounds like in terms of how that connects back to us. But I don't know we have to figure out exactly what our statutory position is in that regard.
Well, because it's kind of feeling like we're just, I don't know, approving fund balances. And maybe that's okay. It's like we've been criticized in the past, the whole city, for having a process that takes too long. So maybe a lot of this stuff has been, smoothed out. I don't want redevelopment to be another bottleneck. But I also feel like I feel some responsibility for voting on something that ends up getting built and not understanding, why changes occurred and that sort of thing. I feel like, because people ask us, we're the commissioners. But anyway, I don't know. I don't mean to.
No, it's fine. This is good discussion. And with this one, and I think it's procedurally, we didn't approve the LDA on this one. We acted as the business agent on behalf of the city that approved the LDA. So unlike the other one, the famous one that's sitting wrapped in Tyvek, when we had a transfer and we were a tri-party agreement with an LDA, we approved that LDA. But in these current deals, since it's the city's property, we've just been acting as a business agent on their behalf. So the board actually, we've approved the grant, we've approved the design for some, that like VHB's work, the plan, all of that, but the actual project itself was only approved by the common council.
But I wouldn't have approved all that other stuff if it's something that I don't think is going to look good or work well for the city of Norwalk.
All right. So we should probably talk about that process then. At the end of the day.
I think that would be great that we talk about it so that we understand what's under our purview. So I appreciate David bringing it up, and that would be great, Brian, that you go into it.
That's totally fine. We have, the Webster lots obviously coming up too. So there's something there to be talked about. And yeah, I think with the context of the design review discussion, we could dive into some of these things. So to help just understand the roles and responsibilities. So I think some of the things that were happening in the past, maybe, we need to talk about.
And there's a balance somewhere. I recognize that. I mean, we don't want to be cumbersome. But at the same time, I think the commissioners want to be responsible. I know I do for, what we're facilitating to happen in the city.
No, that makes sense. Okay, so I'll put that on for the agenda next month.
Okay. Any other discussion items? None? Would like to make a motion to adjourn? David did. Everybody did.
Kelly's like, get me out of here.
I have to be somewhere at 6:30, so I'm like, this is timing's actually working for once.
I'll stop.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night,
Take
everyone.
care, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.